March 21st, 2025. It was a day that began like any other, but the news that broke shortly after would forever change the world's perception of one of the greatest boxing legends in history. George Foreman, the former heavyweight champion, the man who fought his way through the toughest opponents and emerged victorious, was dead. At the age of 76, he had passed away unexpectedly. Fans, sports enthusiasts, and the general public were left in disbelief. How could this icon, a man whose strength and resilience had inspired millions, be gone so suddenly? But the shock didn't stop there. As details of his passing began to surface, whispers started circulating. Some questioned if George's death could be linked to the COVID-19 vaccine he had received just months earlier. Could a man who had fought off the toughest opponents in the ring really have been taken down by a vaccine? The speculation grew, and with it, the sense of mystery surrounding his untimely death. What followed was a frenzy. People speculated on social media, news outlets clamored for interviews with his family, and conspiracy theories began to surface, each more outlandish than the last. But amid all this noise, one question remained. What really happened to George Foreman? The world was in turmoil, desperate for answers. His family was thrust into the spotlight, forced to navigate the grief of losing a beloved father, husband, and grandfather, while also dealing with the relentless speculation about the true cause of his death. This story, which started with an unimaginable loss, would soon uncover truths that many never expected. But before we dive deeper into the mystery, don't forget to subscribe to stay updated on this unfolding drama. The truth behind George Foreman's death might be more surprising than anyone could have imagined. George Foreman was more than just a boxer. He was a living legend, a symbol of resilience and strength. Born in Marshall, Texas on January 10th, 1949, George's early life was anything but easy. Raised in a tough neighborhood, he faced the struggles of poverty, a broken family, and the ever-present dangers of his environment. But from a young age, George had a unique outlet: boxing. It was his escape, his way to rise above his circumstances. In his early years, George was a troubled youth. He found himself caught up in street gangs and was even involved in minor criminal activity. But everything changed when he joined a boxing program through the Job Corps, a government initiative designed to help young people from disadvantaged backgrounds. Boxing gave George discipline, focus, and a sense of purpose. It didn't take long for his natural talent to shine through, and he soon began his journey toward becoming one of the most formidable athletes the world had ever seen. By 1968, George Foreman was already on the radar of the boxing world. But it wasn't until his victorious fight against Joe Frazier in 1973 that he truly became a global sensation. In the Rumble in the Jungle against Muhammad Ali in 1974, he became an international icon. Though Ali would ultimately defeat him, the fight cemented George's place in boxing history. His reign as the world heavyweight champion made him a household name, and for many he was the epitome of physical power and dominance. But as George's boxing career flourished, his life outside the ring was filled with just as much drama. After his first retirement in 1977, Foreman went on a spiritual journey. He found religion, became an ordained minister, and started a new chapter of his life away from the violent world of boxing. His faith transformed him, and he became an advocate for peace and positivity. He even founded a youth center in Houston, helping troubled kids just like he once had been. Yet despite his success and newfound purpose, George wasn't done with the spotlight. In the early 1990s, after a decade away from the ring, George made a shocking return to boxing. At the age of 45, he defied the odds, winning the World Heavyweight Championship for a second time, becoming the oldest fighter to ever win the title. His return to the ring wasn't just about boxing. It was about proving that age, like any obstacle, could be overcome with hard work and determination. In the years that followed, George became more than just a boxer. He was a successful entrepreneur, famously endorsing the George Foreman grill, a product that revolutionized kitchen appliances and made him millions. He was a family man, raising 10 children, and a beloved figure in his community. To many, George was the quintessential American, Success story. Someone who overcame his early struggles, transformed himself and achieved greatness. But behind this image of success and strength was a man who was still very human, someone who had dealt with loss, pain, and personal challenges throughout his life. His relationship with his children, particularly his son George Jr., was complicated, as both had at times struggled to connect on a deeper level. Still, the Foreman family was undeniably close-knit, and George always placed a high value on family, faith, and hard work. As George grew older, he slowed down, spending more time with his loved ones and reflecting on his remarkable journey. But even in his later years, George's health began to decline. He had experienced heart problems which were kept mostly private. Despite this, the idea that someone as invincible as George Foreman could be taken from the world so suddenly seemed unimaginable. Now, with his sudden and shocking death, the world was left wondering, was this the end of an era, or was there something deeper at play? His family, still reeling from the loss, had to navigate both their grief and the media frenzy that followed. The boxing world, too, was left stunned. No one expected the legendary George Foreman to fall so suddenly, especially under such mysterious circumstances. But the Foreman family wasn't just going to let the legacy of George fade into the background. They had to face the questions, the rumors, and the grief head-on. And through it all, they remained committed to honoring his life, even if the true cause of his death remained unclear. The world's mourning was just the beginning. As the initial shock of George Foreman's death began to settle, new, unsettling questions started to emerge. George was known for his incredible strength, not just in the boxing ring but in life itself. So how could someone so powerful, so indomitable, pass away so suddenly? Theories started to spread like wildfire, but one in particular caught the public's attention. Could George Foreman's death be connected to the COVID-19 vaccine he had received just months before? It all started when a few media outlets, desperate for an angle to explain the untimely death of such an iconic figure, began connecting the dots. They pointed to George's recent vaccination and questioned if it had anything to do with his health decline. The timeline seemed to match. His passing was only a few months after his vaccine shot, and there were some reports of him experiencing health issues during that time, though these details hadn't been made public until after his death. The fact that a man with such a clean bill of health for most of his life could suddenly die raised suspicions. The more people talked about it, the more the theory gained traction. It wasn't long before social media exploded with speculation. Posts, memes, and videos, all suggesting a link between the vaccine and George's death, flooded the internet. Some argued that the vaccine might have caused an adverse reaction, while others took a more extreme stance, claiming the vaccine had been the catalyst for his untimely passing. Theories ranged from the plausible to the downright bizarre, and the public was gripped by this new mystery. In the midst of this chaos, George's family found themselves thrust into the spotlight in a way they never expected. They had always been private people, preferring to let George's legacy speak for itself, but now they were forced to address the rumors and the public's insatiable thirst for answers. The Foreman children, particularly George Jr., were caught between their grief and their need to protect their father's reputation. "Why do they always have to make it something else?" George Jr. said in one of his first interviews after his father's death. "My dad had health issues, yes, but he was never the kind of guy to just fall down. This isn't some conspiracy. He was a fighter until the very end." Despite George Jr.'s attempts to dismiss the claims, the pressure mounted. With every passing day, more and more people began to demand answers from the family. Was the vaccine to blame, or was something else lurking beneath the surface? Some members of the family even began to question if they knew everything about George's health. The idea that his death could have been caused by something as ordinary as a vaccine was both maddening and horrifying for them to consider. The situation only became more complicated when reports came out that George had been suffering from heart problems, something that had been kept quiet for years. While it was true that George had been a resilient athlete, he wasn't invincible. His heart issues weren't entirely new, and there were whispers that his declining health might have been a factor in his death. Some speculated that perhaps the stress of receiving the vaccine on top of his heart condition had exacerbated his symptoms. Others, however, continued to insist that the vaccine was the culprit, a narrative that grew louder with every day that passed. Even the medical community weighed in. Doctors and experts who had previously praised the safety of the COVID-19 vaccine were now faced with questions that they couldn't easily answer. Some acknowledged that there could be rare adverse reactions to the vaccine, but they were quick to caution that the likelihood of such an event was incredibly low. Others pointed to George's known health history and suggested that it might have been a combination of factors, including his age and existing conditions that led to his passing. But for many, the simple explanation didn't seem to satisfy the need for a scandalous story. As the conflict continued to rise, the Foreman family began to experience a growing sense of division. While George Jr. and a few others vehemently defended their father's legacy and the role of the vaccine, other family members were less sure. Some feared that by dismissing the connection, they would be perceived as ignoring a serious issue. But with so much at stake, both emotionally and financially, decisions had to be made quickly. Through it all, the public's fascination with George Foreman's death only grew. The world was gripped by the mystery, eagerly awaiting the next piece of the puzzle. Would the truth about his death ever come to light, or would the rumors continue to spiral out of control? Only time would tell. But for now, one thing was certain. The Foreman family's world had been forever changed, and the quest for answers had just begun. The media frenzy surrounding George Foreman's death showed no signs of slowing down. Every day new rumors circulated, new theories were proposed, and the speculation grew louder. As the world searched for answers, the Foreman family was left to grapple with their own personal loss, while also facing the very real pressure of public scrutiny. George Jr., who had always been close to his father, found himself thrust into an uncomfortable spotlight. Though he was grieving, he was expected to take on a public role as the family spokesperson. He appeared on news shows, trying to clarify the family's position, insisting that there was no truth to the vaccine theories. But it wasn't easy. With every interview, he felt more and more drained. The scrutiny was relentless, and the pain of losing his father weighed heavily on him. Still, he put on a brave face, trying to protect his family's name. "Everyone loved my father, and it breaks my heart to see people turning his passing into a circus," George Jr. said in a tearful interview on a late-night talk show. "My dad had heart problems. That's not some secret. But he was always determined to keep going, to live life to the fullest. It wasn't the vaccine, it wasn't some conspiracy, it was just life." Despite his emotional plea, the media continued to pour fuel on the fire. Conspiracy theorists claimed that the family was just trying to cover up the truth. The rumors about the vaccine and its potential connection to George's sudden death only grew more intense. Some outlets even went so far as to suggest that there was foul play involved. The family, already reeling from grief, was being torn apart by the storm of public opinion. Behind closed doors, tension was rising within the Foreman family. While George Jr. was steadfast in defending his father's legacy, other relatives were beginning to question the official narrative. Some felt that, in order to protect their father's image, the family was ignoring the potential role that the vaccine could have played. The idea that a simple vaccination might have been a factor in George's death was hard to dismiss, even for those who had loved him most. "I know this might sound crazy," one family member confided, "but we need to consider every possibility. What if we're not being told everything? I love George, but we can't just let this go." The stress and uncertainty were taking their toll. As tensions grew within the family, they found themselves at odds over how to handle the situation. George Jr. remained resolute, refusing to entertain the idea of the vaccine being the cause. But others, including close cousins and some extended family, were more open to exploring the possibility that something more sinister was at play. Adding to the pressure was the fact that George's legacy was at stake. His reputation as a sports legend and successful entrepreneur had made him an icon not just in the world of boxing but also in business. The Foreman Grill had made millions, and George had carefully crafted his public persona as a beloved, inspirational figure. The idea that his death could somehow be linked to a vaccine, especially one as widely used as the COVID-19 shot, could have far-reaching consequences for both his legacy and the family's financial future. The conflict reached a boiling point. During a family meeting, emotions were high and tempers flared. George Jr. tried to keep the peace, but it was clear that the family was divided. "I don't care about the rumors," George Jr. said, his voice shaking with emotion. "What matters is that we honor my father's life. I know he's gone, but I'm not going to let anyone tarnish his name." Another family member, whose voice trembled with frustration, shot back, "We're not saying we tarnish his name, we're saying we need answers. We need the truth. The world isn't going to stop asking questions. We owe it to his memory to make sure we understand what happened. We can't just ignore it." The room fell silent. There was no easy answer, and the family knew it. The pressure to come to a decision about how to handle the situation only grew as more media outlets continued to sensationalize the death. Rumors spread that the family was considering legal action to investigate the vaccine's potential role, but no one had concrete information. The mystery of George Foreman's death had become something much larger than anyone could have anticipated. Despite the growing tension, one thing became clear. The Foreman family would have to make a choice. Would they continue to publicly reject the vaccine theory and focus on George's legacy as a champion, or would they investigate further, risking their father's iconic reputation for the sake of uncovering a painful truth? The turning point was nearing. The Foreman family was at a crossroads, and whatever decision they made would shape how George's death was remembered. Would they allow the rumors to dictate his legacy, or would they find the courage to face the uncomfortable reality that perhaps there was more to the story than anyone could have ever imagined? Only time would tell. But for now, the tension between honoring George's life and uncovering the truth about his death hung like a shadow over the family. As the days passed, the pressure on the Foreman family continued to mount. They had tried to maintain a united front, but the rumors swirling around George Foreman's death were too strong to ignore. The world demanded answers. What had truly caused the sudden passing of the legendary boxer, the icon whose resilience had defined his entire career? The vaccine theory was now front and center, and it felt like the entire world was waiting for the family to make a statement. One day, amidst the chaos, the Foreman family received an unexpected call. It was from an insider, a former medical professional who had been part of George's team over the years. This person had important information that could change everything. The call was brief, but it was enough to send shockwaves through the family. The insider revealed that George had indeed experienced a serious medical incident shortly after receiving the COVID-19 vaccine, a condition that had been kept quiet for months. The family had been unaware of the severity of George's health issues in the months leading up to his death. This revelation was a game-changer. According to the insider, George had been hospitalized for a short period of time after experiencing severe chest pains and shortness of breath, symptoms that were suspiciously similar to those associated with an adverse vaccine reaction. However, at the time, George had dismissed the symptoms, attributing them to his long history of heart issues. He had refused to allow his family to know the full extent of what was happening. The insider also mentioned that the medical professionals treating George had warned him about the potential risks of the vaccine, given his age and pre-existing heart condition. But George, ever the fighter, had insisted on going ahead with the shot, believing it was important for him to protect himself and those around him. The doctors had been cautious, but had ultimately respected his decision. The insider made it clear that while George's heart condition was likely the primary cause of his death, there was no doubt that the vaccine had played a significant role in his decline. George Jr. was stunned when he heard this news. For days he had been defending the official narrative, telling the world that his father's death had nothing to do with the vaccine. Now, the shocking truth had come to light. His father, the indomitable George Foreman, had suffered in silence, and the family had been kept in the dark about the full extent of his medical struggles. George Jr. felt a mix of anger, guilt, and confusion. Had he been too quick to dismiss the vaccine theory? Had his father's pride and strength prevented him from revealing the full truth to those who loved him? How could he not tell us? George Jr. whispered, staring at the floor in disbelief. How could he keep this from us? The emotions ran high, but this was just the beginning. George Jr. knew that the revelation would force them to confront the reality that their beloved father had faced a difficult and possibly dangerous choice. They were no longer dealing with just a tragic loss. They were dealing with a complex, potentially preventable tragedy. The family had to come to terms with the fact that the vaccine, which many had believed to be harmless, might have played a critical role in his death. As George Jr. shared the information with his siblings, the gravity of the situation hit them all. Some were in disbelief, unable to process the news. Others were overwhelmed with questions. Had they missed signs of his health deteriorating? Could they have prevented this from happening? "This changes everything," one of his daughters said, her voice trembling. If we had just known." In the days that followed, the Foreman family found themselves caught in a whirlwind of emotions. They felt betrayed by the secrecy, but they also understood why George had kept this information hidden. He was a man who had always been in control, always the one others looked up to for strength. The thought of revealing his vulnerability, especially to his children, seemed unimaginable to him. As the family processed the shocking truth, they were forced to reconsider everything they had believed about their father's final days. The media, too, had to adjust its narrative. The public had been quick to blame the vaccine, but now with this new information, the story had taken an unexpected turn. The Foreman family had to decide how to proceed. Would they share the full details with the world? Could they even trust the media to report the truth? Or would the new revelation be twisted and sensationalized? George Jr. knew that the decision to go public with this information was not going to be easy. But one thing was clear: his father's death could not remain a mystery. The truth had to be revealed, no matter how difficult or painful it might be. As the emotional weight of the IT situation hung over them, George Jr. made a promise to his family and to his father's legacy. "We owe it to him," he said, his voice filled with conviction. "We have to honor him, but we also need to make sure that the truth comes out. The world deserves to know." With this revelation, everything changed. The Foreman family was no longer just grieving the loss of a boxing legend. They were grappling with the complexities of their father's final years. They had to come to terms with the role the vaccine may have played in his death, while still holding on to the memory of the man who had been a fighter in every sense of the word. Now the world's questions would be answered, but it would come at a cost. The Foreman family had to decide if they could accept the truth and if they were willing to share it with the world. The media storm surrounding George Foreman's death had reached a boiling point. Rumors, speculations, and conspiracy theories had run rampant for weeks, with every news outlet clamoring for an exclusive angle. But now, the Foreman family had to face the music. The truth about George's final months had come to light, and the question remained: how would they handle it? Would they reveal the painful truth to the world, or would they keep it within the confines of their family? For George Jr., the decision was a heavy one. He had already spent weeks defending his father's legacy, insisting that the vaccine had not been to blame. But the new information, the insider's revelations, had changed everything. His father had suffered silently, and now, with the weight of the truth hanging over him, George Jr. had to decide how best to honor his father's memory while also being transparent with the world. Sitting around a large wooden table in the Foreman family home, the family gathered for a final conversation. The house felt quieter than usual, a somber atmosphere hanging in the air. George Jr. looked around the table, his siblings and extended family all silent, waiting for him to speak. His decision would affect not just the public's perception of their father, but also the family's future. "I've been thinking a lot," George Jr. began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I know we've been trying to protect Dad's legacy, to shield him from the chaos out there, but we can't keep running from the truth. People deserve to know what really happened. I know it's hard. I know it changes everything. But we owe it to him. We owe it to ourselves." His words were met with mixed reactions. Some family members nodded, agreeing that the public deserved answers. Others, however, were hesitant. They feared that the truth would tarnish George's image, an image that had been carefully cultivated. Over the years, for many, George Foreman wasn't just a boxing champion. He was an icon, a symbol of strength and resilience. To have that image marred by the possibility of a vaccine-related death was a bitter pill to swallow. "We can't let the world think Dad was weak," one of George Jr.'s cousins said, her voice trembling. "He was bigger than life itself. If we reveal the truth, people will question everything." George Jr. met her gaze, his expression softening. "I understand. But if we don't tell the truth, if we keep pretending that there's nothing to it, then it'll haunt us forever. We can't erase what happened, but we can make sure it's told the right way." After a long pause, the family came to a consensus. The Foremans would release a statement acknowledging the role that the vaccine had played in George's death. They would not shy away from the truth, but they would also emphasize that his heart condition was the primary factor in his passing. It wasn't a story of blame. It was a story of a man who had fought hard throughout his life, against opponents, against adversity, and against his own health struggles. He had always been a fighter right to the very end. "We need to make it clear," George Jr. continued, "that Dad wasn't a victim. He made a choice just like he always did. He believed in the vaccine. He thought it was important. But the truth is he had health issues, and those issues caught up with him. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was the right one." The Foreman family would stand together, united in their resolve to honor their father's legacy, while also giving the world the answers it had been demanding. They weren't just going to be passive victims of a public narrative. They were going to take control of the story and make sure it was told with respect. As they finalized the details of the statement, George Jr. couldn't help but reflect on the bigger picture. George Foreman had always been a symbol of strength, but he had also been a man of humility, one who faced life's challenges with grace and courage. Even in his final days, he had chosen to face his health problems head-on, despite the risks. And while the family now had to confront a difficult truth, they knew that George would want them to be strong in the face of adversity, just as he had always been. The statement was released to the media within hours. The Foreman family acknowledged the details surrounding George's health issues and confirmed that the vaccine had played a role, but they also made it clear that his heart condition had been the primary factor. The family expressed their deep gratitude for the outpouring of love and support from fans around the world and asked for privacy as they mourned. The media response was swift. Some outlets praised the family for their transparency and for offering a balanced perspective, while others continued to push the narrative that the vaccine had been the direct cause of his death. The conspiracy theories didn't disappear overnight, but the Foreman family had done their part in setting the record straight. They had taken control of their father's story and had shared the truth, no matter how painful. As George Jr. sat in his father's old chair, looking out at the backyard, where they had spent countless hours together, he felt a sense of peace settle over him. They had done the right thing. The world might never fully understand the complexities of George's life and death, but at least the family had been honest with themselves and with the world. In the weeks that followed, the family continued to mourn. There was no easy resolution, no quick fix to the grief they were experiencing. But they knew that George Foreman's legacy, his strength, his perseverance, and his ability to fight through even the darkest times would live on. He had inspired millions, and even in death, his story was one of resilience. The Foreman family's journey had been painful, filled with difficult decisions and painful revelations, but in the end, they had honored their father's memory in the most powerful way possible, by being honest, by facing the truth, and by showing the world that, even in death, George Foreman remained a fighter. As the Foreman family moved forward in the wake of their decision to release the truth about George's death, they found a sense of closure that, while bittersweet, allowed them to start healing. The media storm eventually calmed, and the overwhelming questions and speculation began to die down. The family, having taken control of their father's narrative, found themselves grappling with the weight of his legacy, not just as a world-renowned boxer and businessman, but as a man whose story was now forever intertwined with a difficult yet significant truth. But it wasn't just about handling the legacy of George Foreman. The story of his passing and the family's response had sparked a broader conversation about health, truth, and the challenges of navigating personal medical decisions in the public eye. The world, still in the midst of a global pandemic, was trying to make sense of how to balance personal health choices with public responsibility. George's story had, in a way, captured the struggle that so many others had faced when it came to the COVID-19 vaccine and its uncertain impact on individuals with underlying health conditions. Though the Foreman family had faced the harsh spotlight, they emerged from the ordeal stronger than before, united by their resolve to honor George's legacy truthfully and respectfully. In the weeks following the release of their statement, George Jr. became a key voice in discussions surrounding vaccine safety, particularly for older individuals with pre-existing conditions. He started appearing on podcasts, talk shows, and in interviews, not just as the son of a boxing legend, but as a man who had witnessed firsthand the complex relationship between personal health decisions and public perceptions. In a poignant interview with a leading health expert, George Jr. offered insights on how difficult it was for his father to face the realities of his declining health, but also how his strength had been in never shying away from difficult choices, even in his final days. "We always saw him as indestructible," George Jr. said, reflecting on his father's larger-than-life persona. But even he wasn't invincible. His health was a real issue, but that's something we didn't fully understand until after his passing. It's something we have to talk about because it affects so many people. The truth doesn't make him less of a man. If anything, it shows how much he fought, how much he cared about his family and his legacy. The Foreman family's decision to be open about George's struggles resonated deeply with many people who had faced similar challenges. The public's perception of George Foreman evolved. He was no longer just a boxing icon or a grill mogul. He became a symbol of vulnerability and resilience, a man who fought against the odds in every aspect of his life, including his health. His legacy, once simply that of a champion athlete, now took on new meaning. But the most important aspect of this journey was how George's children, grandchildren, and extended family found a new connection to their father and grandfather's memory. For them, the process of mourning, while painful, had allowed them to see him as a human being, flawed, vulnerable, but always courageous. And that, in many ways, was the most fitting tribute. As part of the family's healing process, they held a memorial service that was broadcasted live. It was an emotional and moving tribute to the life of George Foreman, filled with memories from his boxing career, moments of joy with his family, and reflections on the man behind the gloves. The service was not just for the public, it was for the family, a way for them to share their grief and their love with the world while celebrating the life of someone who had given so much. "I'll always remember my dad not just for his victories, but for his heart," George Jr. said in his eulogy, his voice filled with emotion. "He showed us that the greatest victories are those won off the ring, in the way you live your life. It's not about winning every fight. It's about how you face them and who you are when it's over." The memorial service was followed by an outpouring of support from fans, celebrities, and even other athletes who had been touched by George Foreman's life and career. It was clear that, despite the painful and complicated circumstances surrounding his death, George's legacy would remain unshaken. He had inspired countless people around the world, not just for his athletic achievements, but for his character, his perseverance, and his unwavering spirit. As the days turned into weeks, George Jr. and the family began to reflect more on their father's life, not through the lens of the tragic events surrounding his death, but by looking back at his long, full life and all that he had accomplished. The Foreman family chose to focus on the lessons George had imparted throughout his life, and they carried those lessons forward. One of the most important things George had taught them was the power of resilience, and how even in the face of adversity, there was always room for growth. This theme became the backbone of the family's next chapter. In his father's honor, George Jr. launched a foundation to support heart health awareness, particularly for those with a history of cardiovascular disease. The foundation's mission was to educate the public about the risks of heart disease, and to offer resources for individuals dealing with similar health struggles as George had. As George Jr. spoke about his father's legacy in interviews, he often ended with a question that had become central to his family's journey. If you were in his shoes, would you have made the same choice? Would you have kept going, even when it seemed like the odds were stacked against you? I think that's what makes my dad's story so powerful. It wasn't about avoiding the tough decisions, it was about facing them head-on. The Foreman family's journey had come full circle. They had endured the pain, the scrutiny, and the tough questions. They had learned that the truth, no matter how painful, was ultimately the greatest tribute they could give to their father. And now, as they moved forward, they carried George Foreman's legacy not as a myth, but as a living, breathing example of what it meant to be strong, to fight for what you believe in, and to never back down, no matter the odds. The world would remember George Foreman, not just for the punches he threw in the ring, but for the impact he had on those who loved him, and for the way his life and death sparked a conversation about health, truth, and the complexity of human choice. And in the end, that would be his most enduring legacy. What would you do if you were in George's shoes? The question lingered, inviting reflection, and as the Foreman family moved forward, they knew that, just as George had always done, they would face every challenge with resilience, and they would never stop fighting. As the months passed, the dust began to settle on the tragic loss of George Foreman. The media frenzy that had once dominated the headlines slowly started to fade, but the impact of his death and the family's decision to speak out about the truth surrounding it left a mark on the world. His name, once synonymous with boxing, glory, and grill products, had evolved into something deeper, an emblem of resilience, vulnerability, and the complexities of life and death. For George Jr., the healing process was anything but straightforward. Though the public's attention had shifted to other stories, the loss of his father remained a raw and persistent ache. The days following the memorial service had been filled with small moments of solace, yet the void left by George Foreman's absence was undeniable. Every corner of the family home seemed to echo with memories, his laughter, his wisdom, and the quiet strength he exuded. Yet there was something cathartic in the act of sharing the truth. The Foreman family had opened their hearts and their story to the world. Despite the initial backlash from some who still insisted that the vaccine was solely to blame for George's death, the family remained firm in their belief that George's passing was a result of a combination of factors: his age, his heart condition, and the choices he had made in the latter stages of his life. There was no easy answer, no simple explanation, but by owning their father's story, they had reclaimed their power and protected his legacy from further distortion. George Jr. had decided that this was not just about preserving George's name. This was about making sure that the truth was heard, no matter how difficult it was to face. His father's life had always been a testament to the power of overcoming obstacles, and now his death would carry that same message. George Jr. reflected on the foundation they had started in honor of George's memory, the Foreman Foundation for Heart Health. The foundation had gained significant traction since its launch, helping raise awareness about heart disease prevention and supporting those affected by cardiovascular conditions. It had quickly become a central part of George Jr.'s life, filling the void left by the loss of his father with a sense of purpose. It was a way to ensure that George's legacy was not just about what he had done in the ring, but what he had done off the ring as well. But even as George Jr. devoted his time to the foundation, the ghosts of the past still lingered. The scrutiny the family had faced, the harsh criticisms, and the public opinion that had swung between support and condemnation had all taken a toll. There were days when George Jr. felt like his father was still right there, offering advice and encouragement. But other days were harder, filled with doubt and sadness as he found himself questioning decisions, even ones as monumental as their public statement about the circumstances of George's death. The psychological toll was something the family had not fully prepared for. Behind closed doors, the loss of George Foreman was felt deeply by his children, his wife, and everyone who had been close to him. His grandchildren, who had looked up to him as a towering figure in their lives, now faced the difficult task of understanding how to navigate the world without the guiding presence of the man they had adored. In these quieter moments of grief, the Foreman family came together, whether in the comfort of family dinners or during long, reflective walks through the backyard. They leaned on each other, finding strength in the bonds that had been forged through years of shared experiences. Through this collective mourning, George's family learned that they were stronger than they had ever realized, and that together, they would continue to honor his life in a way that would inspire others. As George Jr. began to take on more responsibility within the foundation, he was confronted with new challenges. There were many who still sought to capitalize on the controversy surrounding George's death. Peddlers of misinformation and conspiracy theorists continued to argue that the vaccine had been the sole cause of George's passing, but instead of being consumed by the negative noise, George Jr. focused on the positives, the lives that were being touched by the foundation, the individuals who had reached out with stories of their own heart health struggles, and the knowledge that they were helping make a real difference. The Foreman family also embraced the role of mentors to others who had been affected by health issues. They had learned firsthand how important it was to face your health with honesty, and George Jr. believed that his father would have wanted them to spread that same message. One of the most impactful stories George Jr. shared was about a young man who had reached out after learning of George's heart condition. This young man had been diagnosed with a similar health issue and had been living in denial about his risks. But after hearing George's story and the family's openness, he had sought treatment and made significant lifestyle changes to improve his heart health. The story was a reminder of how impactful George's journey had been, not just as a public figure, but as someone whose experiences could genuinely change lives. Despite the ups and downs, the Foreman family remained resolute in their mission. George Jr. and his siblings now found themselves not just trying to preserve their father's memory, but to build something that would carry on his spirit for generations to come. The foundation became a symbol of the man George Foreman had always been, someone who fought for others, who was willing to make tough choices, and who used his influence to inspire positive change. And as time passed, the family could see that their father's influence was not bound by the headlines or the public controversies that had followed his death. George's life and his death had opened doors for conversations about health, truth, and the courage to face one's own mortality. The world remembered George not just for his victories, but for how he lived his life, full of heart, determination, and authenticity. Though the tragedy of his death had shaken the world, it was the legacy he had built through decades of dedication, compassion, and strength that would live on. The Foreman family, in all their pain and triumph, had come to realize that the truth about George's life and his death would never be overshadowed. It would be the foundation upon which they would continue to build a future that honored his spirit. Now, with renewed purpose, George Jr. and the family had embraced their role in continuing the fight, not in the boxing ring, but in the fight for health, truth, and the preservation of the incredible legacy George Foreman had created. They were united, stronger than ever, and ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that George's memory would live on in every life they touched. What's your legacy going to be? As they moved forward, this question would be the driving force behind everything they did. It was the question George had asked throughout his life, and now it was one that the Foreman family would carry with them as they fought for others, just as George had always done for them. In the years following George Foreman's death, the legacy of his life, both in and out of the boxing ring, continued to resonate with millions around the world. But while the Foreman family had faced unimaginable grief, they had also found a renewed sense of purpose. What had started as a painful journey through loss had slowly evolved into a mission to carry forward George's story, a story of resilience, truth, and the importance of making the right choices for one's health and well-being. George Jr., as the family spokesperson and the driving force behind the Foreman Foundation for Heart Health, had undergone a transformation. He was no longer the son of a boxing icon. He had grown into a leader in his own right. Over the years, he had become a champion for those struggling with heart disease and other chronic health conditions. But more than that, he had come to realize the power of his father's voice, and now it was his turn to make sure that voice was still heard. The Foreman Foundation, which had initially started as a tribute to his father's memory, had blossomed into a full-fledged health organization with a growing impact. It wasn't just about providing financial support to those in need. It was about offering education and resources to people across the globe. They had developed programs focused on prevention, offering free screenings, diet advice, and emotional support to individuals at risk of heart disease. One of George Jr.'s most passionate initiatives was the Heart Health Education Program. He had seen firsthand the power of information when it came to making life-saving decisions. Growing up with a father who had been so public about his own health struggles, George Jr. understood the importance of transparency. He wanted to make sure that everyone, no matter their background, had access to the same resources that had helped his father manage his condition, even when it seemed like time was running out. The program was launched nationwide, with George Jr. at the forefront. It became a key part of the foundation's outreach, and in 2027 they were able to partner with several major hospitals and universities to create free online resources for heart disease patients. The program also featured personal stories from those who had battled heart conditions, including George's own journey, a reminder of the human aspect of health and how even the toughest fighters sometimes need help. As the foundation expanded its reach, George Jr. began to travel more. He was invited to speak at conferences, health expos, and even on international stages, sharing the lessons he had learned from his father's life and death. He had become an influential voice in the health community, advocating for a broader understanding of chronic illness and mental health. But with all the success, George Jr. still found himself wrestling with moments of uncertainty. There were times when he would find himself sitting alone in his father's old office, looking at pictures of George in his prime. He would remember the days when his father had trained for the biggest matches, the way he had once seemed invincible. It was hard not to feel the absence of that larger-than-life presence. Yet every time he thought about giving up or taking a step back from the limelight, he remembered what his father had taught him. George Sr. had never backed down from a challenge. He had faced the hardest moments in his life with grit and determination, even when it seemed like the odds were stacked against him. His strength lay not in winning every battle, but in getting back up every time he fell. This lesson became the cornerstone of the family's future. They had learned that success was not just about triumph. It was about resilience, the ability to face adversity with an open heart, and the courage to continue despite the pain. During one of his speaking engagements in 2028, George Jr. delivered an emotional keynote address at a major health summit in New York. It was a turning point in his own journey. He spoke about his father's legacy, not just as a boxer or businessman, but as a man who had faced his own vulnerabilities and had used them to help others. People see the world champions, the records, the accolades, George Jr. began. But what people don't always see is the man behind those gloves, the man who struggled with his health, the man who had to come to terms with his limitations. My dad was a fighter, yes, but he was also human. And as his family, we've learned that the greatest victories aren't always the ones you can see. They're the ones you win inside. The crowd was moved by his words, and for George Jr., it was a moment of catharsis. He realized that his father's legacy was not something that could be destroyed or distorted by rumors, conspiracies, or even death. His father's legacy was built on a foundation of truth, perseverance, and the willingness to share the human experience. As the years went on, George Foreman's name continued to be synonymous with strength, resilience, and triumph. But what had emerged in the wake of his passing was a new understanding of the complexity of life, health, and personal responsibility. The Foreman family had become advocates for a cause larger than themselves, helping others face their health challenges and make informed decisions, just as George had tried to do throughout his life. George Jr. was approached by several international organizations to help spearhead initiatives focused on raising awareness about heart disease and health disparities around the world. With his father's story as a backdrop, he was able to speak from a place of genuine experience, giving hope to those who had long been overlooked in health campaigns. But George Jr. and his siblings were not alone in carrying this mantle forward. The entire Foreman family had taken up the charge, each finding their own ways to contribute to the foundation's work. Whether through public speaking, fundraisers, or simply providing emotional support to those in need, the Foreman family remained united in their mission. In 2030, George Jr. decided to pen a memoir about his father's life, their family's journey, and the lessons they had learned through both joy and hardship. The book, titled Fighting for Life, A Legacy of Strength, became an instant bestseller, further solidifying George's place in the hearts of the public, not just as a boxing legend, but as an icon of humanity, vulnerability, and perseverance. The future was no longer about mourning George Foreman's passing. It was about celebrating his life, and in that celebration, the Foreman family found new strength, a strength that would guide them in the years ahead. They had learned to live with loss, but more importantly, they had learned how to move forward, honoring their father's legacy while forging a new path. What began as a difficult and painful journey had transformed into a story of hope. And as George Jr. stood before the audience one last time at a health summit in 2032, he spoke the words that encapsulated the true essence of his father's legacy. True strength isn't found in how hard you can hit. It's found in how you get up when life knocks you down. My father taught me that, and today I stand before you as a man who has fallen, but who refuses to stay down. And I promise I'll keep fighting. With that, the Foreman family's legacy continued, stronger than ever, never giving up, and always moving forward, carrying George's spirit with them every step of the way. What will you do with the fight you have inside of you? As the family looked toward the future, they knew that George's spirit would live on forever, a symbol of resilience, strength, and the unbreakable will to fight for what's right. The years that followed George Foreman's passing, and the subsequent revelation of the circumstances surrounding his death, were transformative, not just for his family, but for the world at large. The Foreman Foundation continued to grow, and George Jr.'s voice had become an influential force in the health community. But the most profound legacy of all was the enduring truth that George had always championed: the importance of living authentically, embracing vulnerability, and using one's story to change the world. By 2035, the world had come to recognize George Foreman not just for his boxing prowess, but as a symbol of humanity's capacity for reinvention and self-discovery. His story had evolved from one of glory and triumph in the ring to a deeper narrative, one that spoke to the resilience of the human spirit, the challenges of aging, and the courage to confront uncomfortable truths. Through the Foreman Foundation, George's legacy had sparked a global conversation about health, vaccine safety, and the importance of addressing mental and physical well-being openly and without stigma. The Foreman family had taken every opportunity to shape the world's perception of George's death, shifting the conversation from speculation and misinformation to one of healing and awareness. While the conspiracy theories had lingered for years, the family had remained resolute in their commitment to transparency, never backing down from the truth. They had seen firsthand how misinformation could damage a legacy, and they had made it their mission to not only correct the record, but to use their platform for good. George Jr. reflected on the journey they had all taken, realizing just how far they had come. The initial shock of losing his father had given way to a renewed sense of purpose. From the pain of uncertainty and public backlash had risen a movement, a force dedicated to health education, transparency, and advocacy. He had found peace in the work they were doing. The world's response to the Foundation's initiatives proved that there was no greater gift than sharing one's truth and using that truth to make a difference. But more than anything, George Jr. had found that their family's unity in the face of tragedy had been a powerful force of its own. They had come together, stronger than they had ever been, and through their collective effort, they had preserved George's legacy as a beacon of hope and courage. One of the family's proudest moments came in 2035, when they launched a global campaign to promote mental health awareness for athletes. This was a cause near and dear to George Sr.'s heart, particularly as he had fought with his own mental health struggles throughout his life. The campaign, titled Strength Through Struggles, was designed to challenge the stigma surrounding mental health, especially in sports, where physical toughness is often prioritized over emotional well-being. George Jr. had always known that his father's emotional vulnerability, the very thing that some had seen as a weakness, was actually his greatest strength. It had allowed him to connect with people on a deeper level, to use his fame for greater good, and to leave a lasting impact that went far beyond the boxing ring. Now George Jr. was determined to ensure that future generations of athletes didn't feel the same pressures to hide their vulnerabilities that his father had once faced. The Strength Through Struggles campaign had an incredible reach, garnering support from major sports organizations, including the NFL, NBA, and international athletic federations. Athletes from all over the world spoke out about their own mental health journeys, sharing their stories of fear, anxiety, and recovery. The campaign encouraged athletes to seek help, just as George had done, and it broke down the barriers that had historically existed in sports culture around mental health. In addition to the campaign, the Foreman Foundation also continued to fund heart health research, providing grants for studies that focused on innovative treatments and preventative measures for cardiovascular diseases. The foundation's continued work brought hope to countless families facing the same health struggles George had fought so long to manage. As the years unfolded, George Jr. also noticed the way in which his father's life had inspired a new generation of young people, particularly those from disadvantaged backgrounds. George's journey from a troubled youth to a world champion, and then to a businessman, philanthropist, and advocate, became a template for success that transcended boxing. The Foreman family's outreach programs worked tirelessly to provide mentorship to underprivileged youth, teaching them the value of hard work, perseverance, and, most importantly, self-respect. George Jr. had come to terms with the profound loss of his father, and while the grief would never fully disappear, he had found peace in knowing that their efforts would carry on the work George had started. In many ways, the legacy of George Foreman had become something even greater than his achievements in the ring. It was a story of redemption, of a man who had faced adversity, learned from it, and then used his platform to better the lives of others. The impact of George's death, though tragic, had sparked a monumental shift in the way the world approached health, personal responsibility, and the importance of truth. Through the pain of loss, the Foreman family had given the world a gift, an opportunity to heal, to grow, and to build a future grounded in compassion and understanding. As the family gathered in 2035 to mark the 10-year anniversary of George's passing, they reflected on how much had changed. The world had moved forward, but George's memory was alive in every initiative, every life touched by the foundation, and every conversation that had been sparked by his story. George Jr., standing in front of a crowd of supporters and family, felt a deep sense of pride. He had become a man his father would have been proud of, not for the accolades, but for the integrity with which he had carried his legacy forward. "The truth is not always easy to face," George Jr. said in his closing speech at the anniversary event. "But it is always worth telling. My father taught me that. And now we are all part of a movement that will continue to change the world, one life at a time. We will carry his memory in everything we do, and we will keep fighting for truth, for health, and for a better future." With those words, the Foreman family stood united, ready to face the future with strength, resilience, and the unwavering belief that George's legacy would continue to inspire and transform lives for generations to come. As George Jr. looked out into the crowd, he felt the weight of his father's influence surrounding him. It was a feeling of peace, of closure, and of endless possibility. The world had changed, but George Foreman's legacy would live on, forever fighting for the truth, forever fighting for health, and forever fighting for those who needed it the most.